Hi, welcome to the Now Moment Journey podcast. And I always have to get situated here. My name is Kirsten Lovett, and it's January 31st, 2024 today. And we're actually getting ready to uh, celebrate Candlemas, which is tomorrow. Well, depending on some dates are varying. Like some people say it's February 2nd, some people say it's February 1st. And so I thought I'd use that as kind of a stepping off point into the topic of animism in a European context. But also, more importantly, like, what does that mean to us here in 2024 today? And how do we work with that? And so I'd like to also, before I get into that though, I do want to tell you if you're new to the podcast or if you're not familiar with who I am or what I do or what this podcast is about. This podcast is just a place for discussion about topics about animism, shamanism, earth-based spirituality, traditional earth-based wisdom. There's so many different names for it, but also sometimes you'll hear me talk about sacred tobacco because that's an area that's very precious to me, as I've been practicing it for uh, almost 12 years. So that's probably my first topic of teaching that I've been teaching about with my sister at Shamanic Earth Medicine, which is our Patreon. It's one of many topics, but I wanted to let you know basically that while I am a shamanic coach and an animistic educator, I'm also a tarot reader and an empath. There's so many different levels to this kind of work. I think a lot of people have a lot of different gifts that it's kind of hard to box them all into one little tiny one-liner. And but I basically serve my clients and patrons and students by utilizing shamanistic techniques, animistic techniques, and mediumistic techniques to uh, determine how they can be in harmony with the earth, for example. That's one thing. And sometimes that means there's shamanic journeying involved. Sometimes that means teaching about how to do offerings. Sometimes that means, concepts in traditional cultures that we need to adopt into our modern culture and kind of, or I should say, remember because they were there way back when. And like, for example, the 3 or 4 different areas that I've been focusing on are sacred tobacco, animal spirits, plant spirits, stone spirits. And that's just kind of a broad description of different ways of working with engaging with the earth. And why bother? Well, I guess I could go into a little bit of my story before I talk about some of the European animism things that I wanted to mention that are going on right now. But my story, and I'd like to kind of maybe do this in pockets over time, but I'd say my reason for staying in contact so much with the nature spirits and earth spirits and water spirits, for example, I think came out of grief mostly, and also loneliness, depression, things like that. Um, I think off and on throughout most of my life, I've um, kind of engaged with nature without even knowing it. I think if you're a person who, like, let's say you're a water person, or somebody who maybe grew up around water, maybe you went to a lake for the summer, or maybe you went to or maybe even not water. Maybe you were skiing with your family or something, and which meant you were near mountains, or maybe you were a hiker and when you were a kid or a teenager or a young person, and maybe you've continued that tradition. A lot of people travel and do like nature hiking, or maybe they go skiing, or maybe they go sailing, or they like to go to the beach and whatnot. And I think people do those things for recreation, but I think there's also another level of consciousness where people seek out, let's just take water, for example, seek out the water for something more than just relaxation, because you can get relaxation in a lot of ways. Um, but it's not the same if unless you're around really a consciousness, which when I use that word consciousness, it's usually for those of you who are into science, just think of it as cycles per second, because that's frequency. And usually frequency is something that is like we were talking about in the episode prior to this one. I was talking about music. Frequency is in music. That's cycles. That's any kind of sound or any kind of vibration at all, you know. And I think you can feel that when you were in nature, the different kind of consciousness that nature has. And there's so many different kinds of consciousnesses. I mean, I'm just kind of lumping them all together and saying it's nature, you know, because you're going to have a different experience when you go to the water versus when you go, you know, maybe stand next to a tree, or maybe when you're in a field, or a mountain. I mean, these are all completely different experiences, but for this podcast purposes, we're going to just call them all nature, because they're different than being indoors, or just or in maybe in an area that's not, let's say, undomesticated or something like that's undomesticated. So what I was getting at with my story was that, and this still happens sometimes, because we're all human and we go through cycles where we feel good and then maybe we need a little bit of help here and there, right? So I think I still do this. I still, I go for walks, but I also sometimes go for an intentional walk that is very much one where I want to kind of tap into a consciousness with nature, for example. And I'm looking out my window so that I can see the trees out here and be a little more inspired so that I can talk to you guys in a way that conveys that. So, but yeah, I get outside, and for example, I went on a short walk today to a water source that I have been steadily kind of getting to know over the last 10 years. And I went through I'd say a 5 or 6 year period where I was very consistent in giving offerings to that place. And I'd say maybe in the last couple of years, I haven't been as consistent, but I still go up there and, I try to keep up with the area, and I look at what the animals are doing, and, and really what the water's doing, to see what the levels are, to see what the quality is, the clearness of the water, to see how the trees are doing up there. And, over the years, there's been changes. Not, it's out of my hands. I don't, it's not my property, so I don't have any decision over it. So things that I don't like have happened. Trees have been cut down, and sometimes the water isn't the quality I'd like it to be. And that's based on a lot of different factors. But despite that, there's still wonderful energy. And when over time, I've built up, I'll talk about this tree in particular. And I should say set of trees, because there's a whole group of them. And in these set of trees, I've basically and my sister was the first one who taught me how to do this. She said, go ahead and give an offering to each tree in honor of a certain ancestor or ancestral line, I should say. And I think I'll do a separate podcast about this down the road, because it's a little more involved than that. Okay. But basically, that's kind of I don't want to say generic, but the basic practice that I've been doing for off and on for at least 10 years, about that. Now, that's how I relate to the land I live on. And that's like just one way, and that's not really the only way or the best way or the highly recommended way, it's just a way. But I would call that's to me, that's animism, because you have to buy into the idea that there's spirits. And if you're lucky enough, well, I shouldn't have said that. You're very lucky if you're a sensitive person and you have gifts like I do, and like many people do, who are sensitive people, highly sensitive people, or people who have psychic gifts or shamanic gifts, or maybe they know they're intuitive, or they can pick up on things that other people maybe don't pick up on right away. But sometimes it's not so much fun. And on the other hand, there are people who don't really, they have a harder time tapping into that energy. And they are usually the kinds of people who don't believe in spirits because it's never affected them. If you've never been woken up in the middle of the night by a nightmare that felt a certain way, not like you just had a bad, burger or something, or if you've been to a place that was kind of foreign, or shoot, maybe even your house that you grew up in, that always, there was maybe areas of the house that just didn't feel right. Stuff like that. I mean, yeah, I'm not really talking about haunted areas. I'm talking more about like just levels of energy. And obviously, there's a whole movie industry that's made billions of dollars out of, haunted houses, and that's fine. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking more about the general weather of the spirit of the house, or the spirit of the land, or the spirit of either where you live or where you're visiting or wherever you are. And that can be a lot of different things. That can be one set of like parameters for your house, and then a different set of parameters for maybe the land around where you live. If you're in a building, it's going to, like with other people, like other units and other, tenants, it's going to like vary there. If you're in a tightly compressed place, like an urban setting where there's a lot of people, and in a small, in a small space, whereas, other spaces are more spread out. The homes are, or the domiciles are spread out. So the energy feels a little bit more wide, but then, that also has issues too. So again, I'm going to keep coming back to my story. So when I was going through a number of things, but I was going through grief of a very special loved one, who's very important to me, even on the, in the beyond. But when they first died, I was instantly just catapulted into nature even more so. Now, before they died, I was already seeking out nature more because I was having, well, now I think it's an initiation, but at the time it just felt like I was being attacked. Very strange symptoms, and to be honest, going into nature, and even if it was just my local park or going to the water, just going to these places that seemed very, even in little pockets, felt very wild. It just felt like I needed to go to these places. I had to find out why I felt better when I went to these places, even just for like 5, 10, 15 minutes. And so then all these things started happening to me there, like at these places. And I guess you would call them maybe sacred places, or a lot of people, when you hear that, they go, oh, sacred sites, that's like, for example, a Machu Picchu. Well, of course that's Huayna Picchu, but uh or but there's also sacred sites in your backyard. Maybe they're harder to find, and they're hidden, and they haven't been taken care of. And a fair assessment of them maybe is that they're sacred places versus sites, where it's like a site's probably a little more grand, and has been kept up better, maybe. Power places, power spots. But these were the experiences I was having. I didn't really have a reference for them. I didn't have any kind of like background. It's not like I was able to go to these places and say, I know why this is happening to me. I understand that if I go to the park, why that's helping me feel better. What is it that I'm getting from doing? I didn't know why any of this stuff was happening. So I was just looking for something to make me feel better. And there was a number of other things going on too. But I also noticed my depression was a lot less when I went to these places. Like, when I would come home and I just felt better. And I think you can say that for most people. A lot of people work the old 9 to 5. They go somewhere for the weekend. They feel refreshed. They come back to work feeling like, maybe those are in two different places, but that was like kind of the old standby routine for a lot of people. And a lot of people would go away for the weekend to kind of a place that was in nature. So it's not that weird or superstitious to think of these places, these sacred places, or these power places, or these places of heightened, uh, slightly wild energy, maybe, especially depending on how they've been taken care of, as being places of renewal for the people who show up there. And dare I say that even these people who go away for the weekend to some, let's say it's a campground or something like that, they're experiencing some form of animism. Unless they're staying holed up in a little cabin and never going outside, on some level, they are experiencing, whether they know it or not, animism. And it's totally compatible with, if you follow a certain religion, it's totally fine. There's no conflict with any religion. It's just the belief that there's some kind of spirit or spirits that inhabit maybe trees, and or maybe certain places, or water, etc., etc. So I'm glad I went over that a little bit with you guys, like, just to let you know why I started this kind of journey 15 years ago. It's 2024. It's let's see if I can add. It's actually getting close to 17 years ago. Yeah, around 17 years ago this happened. And then I'd say between 2007 and 2010, I had pretty much done my own thing and gone to these various places around my general area where I live. And then in 2011, I was lucky enough to be initiated into a tradition from Peru. And that's a whole nother story, which gave me an even broader perspective and deeper understanding of how to relate to nature, among many other things. There's so many other things I learned there, obviously, and still continue to learn through the medicine bundle, which I still have, thankfully, here in my home. And again, I pray to that medicine bundle. But you'll see, like, what do those two things have in common? One, I was talking about, remember I told you about how I've been giving offerings here in my neighborhood to the trees, for example, or to the water. That's something where I'm giving some kind of living essence to the trees or the water or whoever, to let them know I'm keeping the cycle open. You know what I mean? I'm saying hello, I'm saying thank you, and then sometimes I ask for things. Yeah, sure. Um, other times I just say thank you. There's kind of a variety of different things. I think in the beginning you definitely want to start off saying thank you, because you're just getting to know the person. And you'll notice I didn't know I was going to say person. I thought I was going to say tree. But it is like you're getting to know a person. So you don't want to kind of like barge in and go, hey, I need a favor right now. I've never met you, but I mean, I suppose sometimes if it's an emergency, sometimes, yeah, that might happen. But in general, most people don't like do that with complete strangers they've never met. So it's the same thing with like, but the difference between complete strangers in the human realm, like us humans, and the complete strangers in nature that we've become over these years, over these, last 1,000 years, is these spirits really deeply want to talk to us, and they are talking to us, and they are connecting to us, and they want to connect us, and they want us to like connect back to them. Provided, obviously you don't want to do anything that's disrespectful to other people, to other cultures. But I think we're getting a little too hung up. I've seen a lot of talk on the internet, a lot of talk in general. People are getting scared off from trying to relate to nature animistically by traditions where people are like, okay, well, you're not living on your homeland, so you got to follow the ways that we do here. Okay, well, yeah, in certain cases, maybe that's so. But I live in Florida, for example, and there aren't any really living representations, sadly, of the Native Americans that used to be here. The ones that I identify with now, like spiritually, I identify with them. They haven't been here for like 1,000 years. That's just me. Now, if I had I know of a couple people that are 3 or 4 hours away from here that they do really good work. They're Native American and they do excellent work. They're environmental advocates and they're somewhat traditional teachers, but I mean, they're kind of busy with other things. And to be honest, that kind of makes sense, not every traditional teacher or elder or person is going to be available to everyone, maybe to a certain group of people, or maybe even to, a broad group of people who they can handle. But we can't expect every person indigenous to the land we live on that's still surviving and still has maybe recollection of whatever traditional concepts are and in that land. And I'm trying to be as global as I can about this, whether you live in Australia or Africa or Asia or Europe or North America, South America, the islands, anywhere. Your situation is going to be completely different no matter where you are. So, and even in the United States, there's areas of the United States where there's a ton of, or let's say a lot of indigenous population who still remember the old ways and are available to teach people not of their culture. That's a great honor. I mean, that does not happen. I don't think that's the norm. I think that's the exception. That's the exception to the rule. I think the rule is, or the status quo, I should say, is there isn't anybody. Okay, that's still, which is totally sad and depressing and horrible. But does that mean that we're just supposed to, there's a lot of us here from Europe originally, like my people, from a variety of places in Europe. And now we live as immigrants in this country in North America. There's plenty of Eurocentric people who live in other countries too, that aren't still living from where their ancestors are living. So how do we relate to the land that we're not technically from without stepping on somebody's toes, without stepping on, more importantly, not so much human beings, but more importantly, not stepping on the spirits of the land or the spirits of the water? And there is a way. There's plenty of ways to do it. Okay. It's not as, I think people are making it look way too like extreme, like either or. There's one way or no way at all. And that's just not true. So with that in mind, so I told you a little bit about, why I kind of got into relating to nature, relating to spirits, and wanting to find out more and more and more. And so that led me into various, areas. And you've heard me talk about, and I will come back and talk about that again, about sacred tobacco. I haven't yet talked about my weather work, and I am very new to talking publicly about runes. So I will be doing those things in the future as well. But what I wanted to tell you today about is two things. One is, for about a year now, I've had a free Facebook group, which last year it started in the year of Aun, which is long story short, it was the end of an 8-year cycle in the Nordic calendar. And just to give you a frame of reference, what I'm talking about now here is like the Nordic animism. So those of you who know, like, yes, you may be familiar with Vikings and whatnot. Odin, Freya, Frigg, Thor, Loki, whatever you've seen in the comic books or the movies, and you've heard these names before. So, and I'm relatively a new student to this area of animism myself. And so what I did was I started, after learning from a variety of teachers and studying along with my sister as well, Marissa Lovett, who's also an excellent student of Nordic Animism, and teacher as well. And so Rune Rasmussen, who is a Danish scholar, wrote a really good book called the Nordic Animist Year, and I'll give him a shout out. You can get that at www.nordicanimism.com. Click on the shop link, and that'll take you to his web page for the shop. And I think it's at the bottom of the page. You'll see just the book by itself. It's in whatever the Danish currency is. So that makes it's roughly somewhere around $49-50 US dollars, but you may need to do a currency converter in your country if you're in a different country other than US. So, but it's a really good book, and you don't really have to have Nordic ancestry. I think you just have to have an interest in like European folklore, especially if if you have any. Again, I don't want to be one of these people that says, only people of certain ancestry should study things. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying if you have an interest in European folklore, European animism, a lot of things will really be illuminating to you by reading this book. So we studied this book and continue to study it because he does a great job of going through and telling you some of the things that they did traditionally, especially in the context, and this is what I made the group about and continues to be about. Every month we have certain days where we give offerings to, it could be to a deity, it could be to the house spirit, it could be to for a certain, sometimes even saints come into it because, you know, a lot of the studies that have been done were during the time of Christianity. So there is kind of a melding of pagan and early Christian, I should say, Middle Ages Christianity, you know. So, you know, there is a little bit of merging there happening. So it's very open to, you know, you don't have to be a pagan, you don't have to be a Christian, you don't have to be anything, you know what I mean? You can just kind of learn through participating. But my intention with this group, and it's still my intention with this group, and it's a free group, is to make sure we do at least one animist action a month. And what I mean by that is an offering. So, for example, there's a offering coming up. Well, I'll just talk about tomorrow. Tomorrow is not so much, this particular thing I'm going to talk about isn't so much Nordic. It's more like maybe British Isles. But Bridget, which of course is associated with Scotland, Ireland, Wales, England, and some other countries as well. But she's very much associated with, and of course the Saint Bridget, she's very much associated with February 1st, February 2nd, Candlemas. So a very simple thing you could do, and this was something that that my sisters also suggested in the Facebook group, is to light a candle to Bridget, or you could put a white cloth out to be blessed by her. Now, what I also wanted to tell you about, though, more importantly, is there are various gods and goddesses and even giants. We call them Jotun. Sometimes you even hear about elves and fairies and things like that. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, you'll definitely like this group. But for example, in the next, I should say, the new moon after the 3 days after the new moon of February, which I think this year is February 9th, 2024. So it's, you know, if you're watching this after that, it's going to be a different day. But whatever the new moon is in February, for example, that's Goa month. And Goa is associated, according to his book, with the Dis, which are the kind of female guardians. That's just one way of saying it, of the family. And also sometimes they can be guardians, goddesses of like ancestral lineages. Sometimes they're in charge of places too. But February is Goa month, and that's very much about the Disir, what I just mentioned. And so one of the things that he mentions, for example, is that I'm looking forward to is the 3 days, February 9th, 10th, and 11th. You can take some milk out. Very, very, you always do small amounts. When you do any kind of offerings outside, you do small amounts. So you go outside February 9th, 10th, and 11th, and preferably in the evening, you know, so when it's dark. But you could do it at first, you know, like twilight or something like that. And you would say, "Dear Goa, give me both butter and bread." And that's simple enough. And if you want to do it, another way you could do it is you could just give a little bit of milk and then take a very small amount of butter and just let the butter kind of fall on the ground. Obviously, you'll kind of want to do this in a place where it'll, you know, form with the dirt and whatnot, or it won't be a problem for trash or anything like that. So, you know, that's where you have to use your discretion. But this is an example of one kind of animism, in my opinion. And that's an action that you take. And you're signaling to the world, to the spirits, you know, I'm convening with you. I'm giving you an offering of thanks for food. And, you know, and I think it's very compatible with other belief systems and religions. I don't think it's going to come into conflict if you're a Christian or if you're a Muslim or any of the other monotheistic religion. I don't think it's a problem. I don't think it's a problem if you're an atheist. It just doesn't seem like it would be a problem. So, and really, if you think about it, it's kind of the equivalent. I was thinking about this the other day of, maybe you learned, because we're in a very Christian centric country, which sometimes is a good thing. But, one of the things you learn in the Christian church is you say something like God is good. And we thank him for our food, or, something like, blessing the food in front of us on the table through Jesus Christ, et cetera, et cetera. It's kind of the same function, different people, but not really. I don't see it as being that far apart in terms of the purpose of it. So you're kind of saying, I'm in the future. I'm saying this in the now, like as you give the butter and the milk to the earth, you're kind of signaling to them, saying, I'm saying this as a prayer to you, but I'm also saying this in the future too. You know what I mean? So I think it's really fun. And this is something that what we do is we meet once a month, and we meet via Zoom. You don't have to come to the meetings if you don't want to, but you could certainly just join the group. It's a free Facebook group, and it's on my link in bio, which is at www.linktree.ee/now moment journey. And that link has a lot of other stuff on it too. It has podcast episodes and classes and other Facebook groups I'm part of, like Animistic Earth Medicine, the Patreon that I've mentioned before, which is where we do more of the energy type work. We do the shamanic work. So if you're interested in that, that's where you would go for that. But for this particular group, it's a little more of like a book discussion plus activity that you can do on your own, and you can feel free to share your thoughts about this. What I didn't mention until now, and I'll wrap it up after this, is the other book that we're looking at is really interesting. We just started it, so it's brand new. It's called The Tradition of Household Spirits, and the Tradition of Household Spirits, Ancestral Lore and Practices. And it's by Claude Lecouteux. And he is obviously French, but he's a professor of medieval lit and history at the Sorbonne. So can't get much better than that. But he's very knowledgeable about Germanic that time period. But he also obviously knows about France too. So there's some interesting stories about Middle Ages house spirits, and like right now in the beginning of the book, we just got started on it. So we're talking about the house and its grounds, and people like seeking out different parcels of land and figuring out whether the land's going to be okay for them to build on. And there's different like ancestral folklore that you can do to figure that out. But here again, they're not just like showing up to the land and just claiming it as their own and just stomping all over it and digging it up, and just, they're being kind of a little more sensitive to the land spirit's needs, which I think we could use a little bit more of that, if not a lot more. I think it does teach you, even just reading about what people did in Europe, which we would now call superstition, but there's definitely this aspect of respect for the land in it. You can really tell. So this is a very interesting companion, and especially because it focuses on the house. So we all generally live for the most part, in either an apartment or a home, a house, or maybe you live in a mobile home, or maybe, some people live in a camper. But either way, you usually have four walls, uh, if that's the case. And but that's something everybody can identify with for the most part, you know. So I think it brings it much more into the modern times and makes it very interesting so that we can kind of reach back into time, find out what they did then, and see how it applies to us in the now, and how we can regain that positive um, relationship with whether it's where we live right now, or if we travel somewhere and we spend some time there, how we relate respectfully to that. Now, there's a whole bunch of other ways that we can do this. And also, there's also personal healing that can happen when you kind of enter into this world of different thinking and different, um, an open mind about a different way of looking at things. So I'm going to wrap it up there, but I encourage you to go to the link tree. It's linktr.ee/now moment journey. And that's also where my podcast links are too. And just click on the Facebook group. It says free Facebook group, Nordic Animism. And it'll take you to the Facebook group. It's a private group. So, I mean, everyone's welcome, but of course, it goes without saying, we are not people who believe that, there is a superior race or anything like that. So fascism will not be tolerated. So, I'm not interested in any of that sort of thing. We're very much a equal rights for everybody. And so I thought I'd get that out of the way right now, because there is a certain unfortunate history that the Nordic runes and the pantheon of Nordic gods and goddesses have been appropriated by fascism in the past. So I feel the need to address the fact that this isn't a very ecumenical, equal, pantheistic kind of open-minded place. So I hope you'll join us. And I think our next meeting, I forgot the exact date, but I think it's the third Sunday in February. So you have a few weeks from now to decide whether you want to come to the meetings. But we have one meeting a month, and just come and check out the group and see if you like it. And, I hope you'll join us. So, and in the meantime, there'll be some more podcast episodes. I'll be talking more about usually about these topics: animal spirits, plant spirits, stone spirits, animism in general, sacred tobacco. I think sometimes music comes into the play because I use a rattle every day. So rattling is certainly, and sound is certainly a component of any kind of shamanic or animistic work. So sometimes that'll come up. There might be an occasional foray into current events and what does it have to do? How do these things affect what we do when we're trying to live animistically? Because we are affected by the current world we live in. It's kind of hard to escape it. Decisions made for us by others, but sometimes that's a topic we may bring up. But generally, I will try to keep it in. And dream work is also something that happens too. So I hope you'll join us again, and I hope to see you in the future. Okay, thank you for listening.